Today's gospel is really the continuation of last week's gospel. And last week's gospel, Jesus is northeast of the Sea of Galilee. He's in what is now the Golan Heights, which is an area taken from Assyria during the 1967 war. And it is up in Gentile territory. And so he says to the disciples, who do the people say that the Son of Man is? They say, well, one of the ancient prophets, so and so. So he says, well, who do you say that I am? And it's only Peter who says that you are the Christ. And then he tells them not to tell anyone. And then he talks about his passion, his death and resurrection. And so this is the first prediction of his passion. And one of the things about it is that while certainly, there was a diversity of opinion in Israel about the Messiah, whether he would be somewhat like the son of David, whether he would be the one who was the conquering hero, the one who would go throw out all the Romans, reestablish the kingdom of God here on earth, reinvigorate the temple, all those kinds of things that King David did. Was he going to be like that, or was he going to be something different? And I think one of the things about it is that whenever you have a group of religion, you're going to have a diversity of opinion. So it's not that there's a monolith of opinion on that. But certainly probably the disciples thought that that would be the case. And the reason why is that over the time of his discussion about his passion, his death, and his resurrection, we see the following. We see Peter rebuking him in today's gospel. God forbid that should ever happen to you. Do we also see grief? Do we also see kind of an indifference that the disciples are wondering along the road who's the greatest? And Jesus kind of takes them aside and says, what were you talking about on the road? And they're like, nothing. But they were talking about who's the greatest. And the reason why they were talking about who's the greatest is evident in a little bit later on, where either the mother of James and John or James and John themselves come up and say, when you come into your kingdom, we want to have the good positions. We want to have the prime positions. And the apostles are all mad at them. And the reason why they're mad at them is because they thought of it first. They really thought of it first. So again, that idea of, that Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. But when we think about it, is it really something that they would have gotten? It's really outside of what we would think of the Messiah to be. We really think about the Messiah being that conquering hero. We wouldn't think about the Messiah being the suffering servant in the prophet Isaiah, the 4 suffering servant Psalms. We wouldn't think about that. We would think about him being the conquering hero. So it's clear that, Peter, was probably right. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So if Peter was confused about that, then really when we think about what Jesus tells him, not only in his rebuke, but what he tells them is really going to blow their minds. Because really, he's saying that all life is now going to come through me. When we think about the Old Testament, we certainly have the line in Habakkuk that says that the just will live by faith. But again, just like the suffering servant, really, when we think about how did the people think about the relationship with God, it was really in following the Lord in the temple. It was following the Lord in the synagogue. It was drawing close to God by the celebrations of the festivals. It was drawing close to God in hearing and responding to his word. It was following the dictates of the law to show that they are indeed a separated people. And by doing that, they had this relationship with God. But Jesus is saying that no, that's not going to occur, that the relationship is going to be through me, that through me you're going to have life, and that you, just like I'm taking up my cross, that you're going to have to take up your cross. And so when we think about that, it's really, we think about how little we actually have under our control. And so there are situations, whether it be health, whether it be financial, that are beyond our control. There are situations where, even though it is within our control, we can't be responsive. Don't have control over other people's responses to us. So, example, John the Baptist spoke the truth. He was going to speak the truth. And so, even if that meant talking to Herod and saying it's not lawful to have your brother's wife, he was going to speak the truth. But again, he wouldn't know necessarily what was going to happen with that. And so, one of those things about our crosses is that there are situations in life that make things difficult. And so, are we going to do those on our own? Or are we going to follow Christ? Are we going to have Him help us, guide us, sustain us with His mercy? And so, one of the things about this particular gospel is that it does help us to understand two things. It helps us to understand His passion, His death, and resurrection. When He predicts that to the disciples, the apostles, they're very confused. And then I'm sure they're even more confused when He talks about picking up your cross and following Him, that everything is going to come through Him. But they will begin to understand that, but only later. But they can look back, as they did, and faithfully report in the Gospels what occurred. Because once the passion, the death, and resurrection occurred, then they understood what He was saying. Then they understood the meaning. So sometimes in our life, we just don't understand why the situations are that way. But we then continue to trust in the Lord, to continue to follow Him, that He may give us life. Thanks and God bless.